Standard 10th Mathematics Part 1 Chapter Probability in Understanding Concepts in video number 1. Children, we use the following words to express the possibility of events in our daily conversation like probable, maybe, impossible, sure, nearly. Let's understand a few examples regarding predictions, that is, possibilities of events happening in the future. Most probably it will rain today. It is impossible to defeat Indian cricket team in the next match. I will surely get first class. The inflation is likely to rise. There is no possibility of polio infection if a child is given the polio vaccine in time. So children, whether you know it or not, you are a fortune of teller of sorts. Every day, all day, you're constantly predicting what will happen. You can choose what table to sit at in the cafeteria based on where you think your friends will sit. You choose clothes based on what you think the weather will be. You choose and choose and choose. Every choice is a prediction of how likely you think an event or series of events is to happen. We can actually measure how likely it is for something to happen, and that measurement is called as probability. So children, probability can be used in forecasting weather, in sports strategies, in insurance options, games and recreational activities, and even making business. Now children, that we know what is probability. Probability is the likelihood of some event to occur. To understand probability in more detail in our day-to-day life, let's understand the meaning of few concepts written on the board. The first one is called as a random experiment. Now, what is a random experiment? The experiment in which all possible events, that is outcomes, results, are known to us, but we cannot predict them with certainty. There is some uncertainty in predicting the results, is called as a random experiment. For example, children, in our everyday life, we take a die in our hand. We throw the die. What do we get on the upper surface of the die? Definitely, we have 6 surfaces of a die. So either we get the number 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. That means, children, over here we are able to predict the outcome of the event, that is throwing a die. That is called as a random experiment. Another simple experiment, children, a coin placed in our hand. We toss a coin. What do we get on the upper surface? Either a head or a tail. That is, children, a random experiment. So an experiment in which all such possible results can be predicted. All possible results that can be did in an event without certainty of the result is called a random is called a random experiment. The examples that we saw was tossing a coin or throwing a die. Even children, when we take a pack of cards in our hand, how many cards do we have in that pack? Definitely we have 52 cards. So, if we pick out any one card at a random, right, that possibility of getting a spade or a club or a heart is called as a random experiment. Now children, what is an outcome? Outcome is an event where the result, you actually know what you're going to get from that random experiment. So children, when results of a random experiment are known, they are called as outcomes. So they are the results of a random experiment. For example, when you toss a coin, tossing of a coin, what do we get? Either you get a head or a tail. You have only two outcomes. So the results can be predicted. But with what perfection will you get either only a head or a tail? Cannot be told. You cannot have the certainty of the outcome of that result. But definitely, you know, when you toss a coin, you either get a head or a tail. That is called as an outcome of a random experiment. Now, what is sample space? Sample space are all the possible outcomes of a random experiment. For example, children, again, when you toss a coin, you either get a head or a tail. So the set of all possible outcomes of an event or an experiment is called as a sample space. For example, children, when you throw a die, right? So the experiment over here or the event over here is throwing a die. Let's name it, right? An event A is an event where you throw a die. Then what can you say about the sample space of this particular event? What does it contain? It contains sample points, that is right from 1, either you get 1 on the upper surface or 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. These are called as sample points of the event of throwing a die, and it is always denoted by capital S. So what is sample space? The set of all possible outcomes of a particular event. If you talk about tossing a coin, then the sample space will be either an edge or a tail on the upper surface. Now, definitely you can count the number of sample points in that sample space and can be written as number in sample space is equal to 6. For tossing a die, what is the number of sample points? Number of sample points are only 2. So children, it is very important before we proceed in the chapter of probability to understand a few concepts like random experiment, outcome and sample space. What about equally likely outcomes? The name itself suggests, children, it is said that equally likely outcomes. That means in any event when you know or you can predict that the outcomes that you get are of equal percentage. For example, when you toss a coin, either you get a head or definitely you get a tail. So the possibility of getting the two outcomes are divided into 2. They are equal. The percentage is equal. So such events are called as, or such outcomes are called as equally likely outcome. So let's proceed to find out the sample space and the number of sample points in understanding the different examples or events in probability. So let's recall, children, what is probability? Probability is the branch of mathematics concerning numerical descriptions of how likely an event is to occur or how likely it is that a proposition is true. What is a random experiment? The experiment in which all possible results are known in advance, but none of them can be predicted with certainty, and there is equal possibility for each result is known as a random experiment. What is an outcome? Result of random experiments is known as an outcome. For example, in a random experiment of tossing a coin, there are only 2 outcomes, either a head or a tail. Equally likely outcomes. A given number of outcomes are said to be equally likely if none of them occurs in preference to others. For example, if a coin is tossed, possibilities of getting head or tail are equal. What is a sample space? The set of all possible outcomes of a random experiment is called the sample space. And definitely, you know, children, it is denoted by S or omega. Each element of sample space is called as a sample point.